The mall buzzed with its usual weekend chaos, the hum of chatter and the faint jingle of holiday music blending into a cacophony that made it hard to focus. But for Daniel, all of it faded into the background the moment he spotted her. Horror. Claire. She was unmistakable, even from a distance. Her honey blonde hair cascaded in loose waves down her back, catching the light as she tilted her head to laugh at something the man beside her said. A man who was decidedly not Daniel. He was older, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his tailored suit screaming money, and Claire, his wife, the woman who had once sworn vows to him, was clinging to the man's arm like he was her lifeline. Daniel's chest tightened, his breath hitching as he watched them stroll past a jewelry store. The older man gestured grandly toward the display window, and Claire's face lit up with a smile so bright it stung. She nodded eagerly, and moments later, they disappeared inside. Daniel's feet moved before his brain could catch up. He followed them, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the whole mall could hear it. Peering through the glass, he saw the man slide a sparkling diamond bracelet onto Claire's wrist. She laughed again. That high, tinkling sound that used to make Daniel feel like the luckiest man alive. Now, it felt like shards of glass scraping against his eardrums. He stepped back, his vision blurring as reality crashed over him. How long had this been going on? His mind raced, replaying every late night at work, every vague excuse, every time she'd brushed off his touch or snapped at him for no reason. It all made sense now, too much sense. The ride home was a blur. By the time he pulled into the driveway, his knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. He sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the front door of the house they'd shared for the last 5 years, the house he had worked tirelessly to provide for her, the house where she'd smiled at him over breakfast just this morning, telling him she'd be out shopping all day. Out shopping. The bitter irony of those words twisted in his gut. When he finally walked inside, the silence was deafening. He paced the living room, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He didn't know what to do. Confront her? Pretend he hadn't seen anything? No, he couldn't just let this go. Not after everything. The sound of keys jingling at the front door snapped him out of his spiral. Claire breezed in, her cheeks flushed, carrying a stack of shopping bags. She barely glanced at him as she set them down by the couch. Long day, she said absently, shrugging off her coat. You wouldn't believe how crowded the mall was. Daniel crossed his arms, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I think I would. Something in his tone made her pause. She turned to look at him, her brow furrowing. What's that supposed to mean? He took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. I saw you, Claire, at the mall, with him. Her face went pale, but only for a moment. Then, to his astonishment, she laughed, a soft, mocking laugh that sent a chill down his spine. Oh, Daniel, she said, shaking her head as if he were being ridiculous. That was my uncle, my father's brother. You remember me telling you about him, right? Daniel stared at her, his jaw tightening. Lies, all lies. He'd heard her mention an uncle once or twice, but the man at the mall? That wasn't family, not unless families started buying each other diamond bracelets. Funny, he said coldly, his voice low, because the way you were hanging off his arm didn't exactly scream uncle. Claire's smirk faltered, but she recovered quickly, lifting her chin defiantly. Jealousy doesn't suit you, Daniel. It's pathetic. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Pathetic? Really? What's pathetic is watching you sell yourself to some old guy who can buy your affection while I've been busting my ass to give you everything you could ever want. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. Everything I could ever want? Please, you think that little paycheck of yours is enough? I deserve more than this mediocre life you've trapped me in. His breath caught, her words cutting deeper than he cared to admit. Trapped you? He repeated incredulously. You married me, Claire, or did you forget that part? She rolled her eyes, turning away from him to pick up her bags. People change, Daniel, and frankly, you haven't kept up. The dismissiveness in her tone was the final straw. He grabbed her arm, forcing her to face him. Who is he? Claire, tell me the truth. She wrenched herself free, her eyes blazing. Fine, you want the truth? He's everything you're not. Successful, ambitious, generous. Unlike you, he actually knows how to treat a woman. The venom in her voice was staggering. Daniel took a step back, his chest heaving as the weight of her betrayal settled over him. He'd always known Claire was materialistic, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Get out, he said quietly, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. She blinked at him, startled. Excuse me? I said get out, he repeated, louder this time. Pack your things and leave. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here, not after this. For the first time since he'd confronted her, Claire looked genuinely shaken. You can't be serious, she said, her voice wavering. This is my home too, Daniel. Not anymore, he shot back. You made your choice, now live with it. She opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. Swallowing hard, she grabbed her bags and stormed upstairs. Daniel stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding as he listened to the sounds of drawers slamming and zippers being yanked shut. When she came back down, she was dragging 2 overflowing suitcases behind her. She stopped in front of him, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice thick with bitterness. You'll regret this. He met her gaze unflinchingly. The only mistake I made was trusting you. She flinched at that, but quickly masked it with a cold smile. Good luck finding someone else who'll put up with you. With that, she turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was oppressive. Daniel sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. He should have felt relief, maybe even triumph, but all he felt was emptiness. His phone buzzed in his pocket, startling him. He pulled it out, staring blankly at the screen. An unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? A deep, gravelly voice came through the line. Daniel, we need to talk. His blood ran cold. Who is this? There was a pause. Then, it's about Claire. Meet me at the Hilton downtown. Room 1402. Don't keep me waiting. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The voice on the phone hadn't given him a name, but it carried an authority that left no room for negotiation. Who could possibly know about Claire? He wondered as he drove toward the Hilton downtown. His mind raced with possibilities: her lover, someone connected to her family, or perhaps even someone from her past she had never mentioned. Each thought twisted his stomach tighter. The hotel loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the late afternoon sun like a beacon of dread. He parked haphazardly in the nearest spot and strode inside, ignoring the curious glances from the concierge. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt interminable, each ding of the floors passing by echoing louder than the last. When the doors finally slid open, he hesitated, staring at the hallway stretching before him. Room 1402. He knocked, the sound sharp and final. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his tailored suit screamed wealth, but his piercing blue eyes held a coldness that made Daniel's breath catch. Come in, the man said, stepping aside without introducing himself. Daniel stepped into the suite, his eyes sweeping the room. It was opulent, all sleek lines and muted tones, with a cityscape view that stretched endlessly. But it wasn't the decor that held his attention, it was the thick folder resting on the coffee table, its edges slightly frayed as though it had been handled countless times. The man closed the door behind them and gestured toward the couch. Sit. Who are you? Daniel demanded, refusing to move. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. The man smirked, leaning casually against the arm of a chair. Let's just say I'm someone who knows more about your wife than you do. Or should I say, former wife? Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. What do you want? I want to help you, the man replied, his tone smooth but laced with something darker. Claire isn't who you think she is. She's not just a gold digger, she's a predator. And you're not the first man she's destroyed. Daniel's fists clenched. You're lying. The man chuckled softly, crossing to the coffee table and picking up the folder. He flipped it open, revealing a stack of documents and photographs. Am I? Take a look for yourself. Reluctantly, Daniel stepped closer. The first photo made his stomach churn. It was Claire, younger but unmistakably her, sitting on the lap of another older man, her smile wide and predatory. Beneath it was a document detailing a divorce settlement, signed years ago. There were more photos, Claire laughing with men at galas, seated in luxury cars, draped in jewels. Each one seemed to tell a story, a pattern of calculated seduction and betrayal. This doesn't prove anything, Daniel said, though his voice wavered. She told me about her past relationships. Did she? The man raised an eyebrow. Did she tell you about the blackmail? The lawsuits? The men who lost everything because they trusted her? He pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. Read this. It's from a private investigator hired by one of her previous victims. Daniel picked it up, his hands trembling as he scanned the pages. The report detailed Claire's methods, how she would target wealthy, vulnerable men, charm them into marriage, and then systematically drain their finances. In one case, she had forged signatures to gain access to a bank account. In another, she had manipulated her husband into signing over his company shares before leaving him penniless. The words blurred as he read, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the monster described in these pages. Why are you showing me this? Daniel asked roughly, looking up at the man. What do you get out of it? The man's expression hardened. Because I was one of her victims. 10 years ago, she ruined my life. I've spent every day since trying to bring her down. And now, with your help, I can. Daniel sank onto the couch, his legs suddenly unsteady. My help? What do you expect me to do? I need evidence, the man said, leaning forward. Something concrete to tie her to her crimes. You're still legally married, which means you have access to her accounts, her records. If we can prove what she's done, we can stop her before she destroys anyone else. Daniel stared at the folder, the weight of its contents pressing down on him. Claire's betrayal cut deeper than he had imagined, but the thought of revenge stirred something dark within him. And if I refuse? He asked quietly. The man shrugged. Then she walks away scot-free, and you join the long list of men who fell for her lies. But if you help me, he paused, a faint smile playing on his lips. We make sure she pays for what she's done. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Daniel's mind raced, torn between disbelief and a growing anger that burned hotter with every passing second. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted justice. For himself, and for the other men whose lives she had shattered. What do you need me to do? He asked finally, his voice low and resolute. The man's smile widened, though it didn't reach his eyes. Good decision. Here's what we need to